are going to be in the book of Hosea. If you want to find Hosea, it's we're moving our way through scriptures. We're about 2/3, a little bit more through. Find Hosea. We're going to be in chapter 1. This is a difficult passage. I would say out of the 52 or 53 sermons we're doing on identity, there's about 10 of them that are hard. And they're harsh. They're harsh from the Lord. And I think if you only read the Bible in pieces, you could get pretty scared. If you read just the first part of Hosea, you go, oh man, right? I mean, God is pretty upset. But there's a tension that's supposed to be here, and I think any parent knows this tension, that you see your kids make some good choices and you see your kids make some terrible choices. But there's something about you that loves your children anyway, and there's a struggle in you to want to discipline them, but at the same time, you want to kind of let them off the hook. And I think every parent struggles with it, and it's hard to stay consistent because sometimes your love for your children overrides what they're doing, right? And you've seen people do this. Like, it's amazing that throughout history, I don't know if you've watched or read the book about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But there were more people. If you didn't know, he was not the only one that they tried to kill on that same night. And there was a whole conspiracy of people that were involved in the assassination of Lincoln. And one of them was a woman who ran a house, and her son both conspired together. And even when she's in jail, they say to her, you need to tell us where your son is right now. Right, because they can't find him because him and Booth are kind of running through it actually took them almost half a month, a little over half a month to even find Booth, which is some history that people don't realize. But as they were tracking him down, they realized she was a part of it. And she kept saying, you can't make me do this. He's my son. Right? So there's a part of her that despite getting caught, despite it being the president being killed, her allegiance was more to her child than it was overriding anything she knew. Right? And I think every parent has that, including God, by the way. God's mercy always overrides his anger. But I think sometimes we get complacent in the fact that we receive so much mercy. We get so used to the mercy that we start kind of going, I have mercy, so I can do whatever I want. But as any parent knows, it grieves your heart when you give mercy to your children and then they still choose to do the things you told them not to do. You taught them not to do it. You hope that they don't do it. And when you give them mercy, sometimes they take that as an excuse to keep doing what they're doing. Right? They go, oh, well, I got mercy. Right? And I think as human beings, we do the same thing to God. So there are two kind of metaphors that are in the book of Hosea. And one of them is about marriage, and one of them is about fathers and sons, which we're not going to be talking about today, although we are titling this sermon Sons, because what you'll see is the kings that are mentioned are all fathers and sons. And those fathers and sons the fathers teach their children terrible things, and it gets worse and worse, to the point where God has to send Hosea, and he sends him in a very interesting way. But ultimately, what God wants is for every son to turn back to his father, right? Every child to turn back to their heavenly Father. And what's amazing about God is no matter where you've been, or no matter what you've done, no matter what things you've messed up, right? No matter how dirty you've gotten, like the kids were talking about, like they picked it up pretty fast, right? Who cleans you on the inside? God does. He forgives us, right? Well, that's kind of a deep thought when you think about it. It was somewhat shocking. I don't know if it was to you to listen to them, because there was a little bit of oh man, they jumped immediately to the right thought. Like, we're talking about cleaning your dog, and immediately they go, oh, this is about forgiveness, right? Because they know immediately, right? Because they understand what it's like to have an animal that's dirty, and we understand what it's like to have animals that are dirty, and they clean themselves, and then you go, yeah, but the real issue is why? Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep doing this? So, Hosea chapter 1 starts like this. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Berai, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, king of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, which is really Jeroboam the second, because it tells us he's the son of Joash, king of Israel. This tells us more than we realize, because you are talking about a series of pretty terrible kings, except Hezekiah, really, in this list, but pretty terrible kings, that the sin that they keep committing is that they say that they care about the Lord, but then they allow people to mix things in anyway, right? So they say, well, we care about the temple, but you can also do your incense on a mountain. We care about praying to God, but you can also pray to other gods. One of the things I saw this week that was most upsetting to me, and I usually don't get political, but I don't know why this is so upsetting, and you're thinking I'm going to be political, but this is a little bit different. If you ever subscribe to the PJ Library, which is like a Jewish kids book, there's a foundation that's behind it, and anybody who's Jewish can subscribe to it. And you get free kids books in the mail once a month. And it actually says on their front page that anybody who's Jewish, whether they have faith or not, whether they believe in other gods or not, they go through this whole thing, right? And then there's a little asterisk. So it says, we are inclusive of any person of Jewish background, asterisk, and then you jump down to the bottom of the page and it says, except for Messianic Jews, right? So they pretty much said you can be subscribed for free to Jewish books for children if you mix in things, if you believe other gods, if you have different identities, if you mix things together, except if you believe Jesus is the Messiah, right? So you think about that. What's happening there is a lack of identity, right? That there's an idea that if you don't even believe in God at all, you can still get a book about Judaism, which I don't know why you'd even want one. But you can get one about Sukkot, right? They have little Sammy Spider, and he learns all about Sukkot. It's a great book, right? I don't know if you know this because, when you build a sukkah, there's always spiders. So I thought it was great. I wish I had written it because it's such a good idea. But when you have people who teach certain things and those certain things continue on, it's very easy to allow people to mix things, right? And you can say, well, yeah, you go to any bookstore, if there's any left really, but you go to any bookstore, you go to the Jewish section, and there's, how to be a Buddhist and be a Jew, right? How to be into Zen. There's Zen Judaism, right? There's there's atheist Judaism. There's agnostic Judaism. Really, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that it's weird, I think, to be the chosen people without a chooser. If there's nobody who chose us, then what are we chosen for? But you can get any kind of book, but the minute you say, we believe that in the Messiah, they put you in a different category, right? It's interesting. And the same thing is happening in the time of Hosea. So Hosea, which his name actually has the same root as Yeshua. So Yeshua and Hosea have the same root. It means to save. So Hosea means saves. He's happening at the time of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now, this should give you a clue that there's two sets of kings. This means that we go back and there's essentially a civil war that happened in Israel, and they split into two kingdoms. There's a northern tribe of Israel and the southern tribe of Judah. And the northern tribes are like pumping out kings, right? They keep murdering each other. They keep dying early. Some of these people become kings when they're in their 20s. One of them becomes king when he's 7. So it's like, they're just moving through kings. Whereas the southern part of Judah has Jeroboam II, who, even though there's only one king, and he's known for making the kingdom strong, he's actually one of the worst kings in the entire Bible. And the Bible is very clear because it spends a significant amount of time telling you how terrible he was. And what it means by terrible was that he didn't knock down the high places. He let people worship other gods. And then ultimately he actually puts his own son through the fire as a sacrifice to Baal, right? Sacrifices his own children. Pretty terrible guy. That would be terrible on almost anybody's measurement, right? So Uzziah was a good king. And he's in Judah, but he was corrupted and he didn't take down any of the high places. Now, this is also connected to our Torah portion because he gets Seraat, right? And he dies from the leprosy. So in the process of him dying, his son Jotham takes over, and he becomes king. And they say, well, it says he's pretty good, except that he didn't remove any of the high places that his parents had set up. So all the high places, if you go to Jerusalem, it's actually an interesting thing. You can go all around Jerusalem. There's mountains around Jerusalem. We sing the song, as the mountains are around Jerusalem, so the Lord is around his people. You go to those mountains, and there are different altars to different gods. And they found altars on the top of almost every mountain. In fact, there are altars on the top of almost every mountain in the world to some god, right? And ultimately, the goal, and this is actually Rashi who came up with this, was he said what God was trying to do is take all of those gods on all the different mountains and tear them down and only lift up the one true God on one mountain. So there's one mountain, Zion, and God would be lifted up on that mountain. And what they're doing is they're tearing down all those other hills. But in the time of the kings and in Chronicles, the kings like Uzziah and Jotham, they not only didn't tear down those things, they actually built some extra ones, right? I mean, right after Solomon dies and the kingdom sort of splits into its pieces, one of the kings actually takes 2 golden calves and places them in different temples. So he says, listen, if I'm going to go back to the original, I'm going to go back to Mount Sinai and go back to the original sin, and we're going to worship calves again. Like, that's how crazy this is. So it's a time where Hosea comes to Uzziah, Jotham, and then Ahaz. Ahaz actually participated in the abominations. This is what Scripture said, in the abominations of the nations. He starts acting like everybody else. So Israel starts looking the same as everybody else, when really we are called to stand out as a light to the nations, right? I don't know if you saw when we were talking about, and I think I said this last week, but when the eclipse went by, for us up here, we had about 90% coverage. So we were kind of shocked how much light you still get just from 10% of the sun. Like, it didn't really change much. We went to the zoo, the animals didn't even care. They were just doing their thing. Not one monkey looked up and went, wow. The rest of us were doing it, right? 10% light was enough for them. Like, they were like, I mean, I think one looked a little depressed. I think we thought the one monkey looked depressed. But other than that, right, they were all fine, like 10% light. And it's amazing that if you just light a candle in a dark room, the darkness flees, right? So you have this sense that the word of the Lord is coming to him in the middle of this time where all of the kings are bad and all of them are relying on their own strength. And even Hezekiah, who we know, and you can still go through the tunnel that he built, he literally redirected the water in Jerusalem so that they could put the walls up around Jerusalem to protect themselves from the Assyrian Empire, which ultimately didn't work anyway. You can still walk through Hezekiah's tunnel today. There's even a plaque on the inside that goes all the way back to that time that says this is the tunnel that Hezekiah built, right? It's really pretty amazing. Still has water in it. It still flows that direction. But it says at the end of Hezekiah's life that he got sort of used to being safe, and then he started telling the Assyrian Empire how much stuff he had in the vault, right? Like, literally he said, hey guys, come look at how much stuff that the Lord has blessed us with. So in his brag of the Lord, he let the Assyrians know we have a ton of gold and a whole bunch of stuff, and they were like, now we know where to rob. So, which is essentially what they did, right? So that's when Hosea shows up, right? So what essentially is you have to think of God as a father, and how would a father feel if all of his children were continuously unfaithful, and not just unfaithful, but radically unfaithful, like trying to be unfaithful, like doing things that were like so bad that it not only they didn't just ignore the bad things, they actually participated in the abominations, right? I mean, it's kind of the world we live in today, right? That we often participate, we mix in, we put all these things together. So God does ask Hosea to do something really, really weird. And by the way, all the prophets do something weird. Jeremiah rips his beard out. You know, one prophet walks around with only his underwear on. Like, they're trying to get people's attention. So Hosea, I think, gets the worst job out of all of the prophets. By the way, Isaiah is at the same time as Hosea. Isaiah does not get it bad. Isaiah has a long book. He gets to prophesy about the coming Messiah, right? Hosea has to get married. And not only does he have to get married, look at verse 2. It says, when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. So his job was to marry essentially a prostitute, and it would be a symbol of how God feels about his people. Right? And I don't know about you, but I like the symbolism is like pretty amazing. But I can't even imagine being Hosea. I don't know what his class is going to be like in heaven. Like, if you go to his like breakout group and he's going to say, Hosea, how did you feel about this? I think he would go, this was the worst. Now, part of this is because if you can think of the worst way that somebody can betray you, right? The worst way that somebody can betray you, I think marriage is the best example. Because marriage is a covenant, marriage is a promise, marriage is a ceremony, marriage is, right? So you take marriage and you say, what if you married somebody who didn't just cheat on you, they were like really good at it, and they did it for money, right? Can you imagine what it would be like to marry somebody like that? Now, not even saying, oh, they used to be like that. Can you imagine that they're going to continuously be that? So he doesn't just say marry someone who used to be a prostitute. That would be redemption. Right? You could say, oh my gosh, we can save her from a life of prostitution. But no, he's saying, no, I want you to marry her and also have children, which, by the way, makes it very unclear on who these children even belong to. Right? So now we're like, and Hosea's got to stick with it. Right? And you get that for 4 chapters. So it's trying to set up for us this sense of how upset should God be? And then it asks the question, how upset is God? So there's 2 different things that are happening. How upset is he? And then how is he actually going to treat us? Now, the Bible is very clear. Leviticus is clear. The entire Torah is clear. That if somebody is unfaithful to you, that is one of the reasons you can get divorced. So there's this sense of, if God wanted to, he could cut us off and not call us his people anymore. If he wanted to, the law makes room for a kind of divorce, right? So it's funny that people have read this in the past and they only read the first chapter and they go, see, God divorced Israel. They just didn't read the rest of the book or the rest of the Bible, because that's never what God actually does. In fact, what he's saying is you don't even realize the kind of wave of grace that you're riding, because you look like to me what Hosea's wife looks like to him. Do you see? Like, this is like the people of God are essentially do whatever they want, and they worship however they want, and they mix things in, and they do all, and they rely on their own strength, and they get used to grace to the point where they start going, well, we have freedom, so freedom means I can do whatever I want. And then they start doing things that are clearly outlined in Scripture not to do. And then the next thing you know, the days start changing, the people start changing, the ceremonies start changing, and we end up in this mess that when you even say to somebody, hey, how come you do that? They get angry, right? You go, that's kind of weird that you name that after another god. And they go, how dare you? And you're like, I don't even know what to say right now. Like, this is literally what the Bible talks about over and over, mixing things in, right? And each one of these kings, whether it's Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and particularly Jeroboam II, these kings were like really good at it. So some people think that what Hosea is doing in each one of these children that he's going to have is actually speaking against each king. And that's a good way to look at it, although we're not going to spend that much time in it. So he says to him, marry a woman of harlotry, have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So, okay, thinking, in the Bible, most of the time when somebody conceives a son, we think we're going to get saved. But then God does something weird. I mean, think about all the other times in Scripture. God says, I want you to have a son, and I want you to name him Salvation. Or I'm going to have a son, and I want you to name him, like El Gibor or something like, and we get all these great names that you can name a kid. Now, nobody has ever named their kid Jezreel, which is the next one. It says, then the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel, for yet a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. Now, Jezreel is an interesting place. If you want to know where it is today, you guys know where the West Bank is generally. Like they talk about the West Bank all the time. In fact, probably the next battles that are going to happen in Israel are going to happen north of the West Bank and maybe in the West Bank, which is going to be pretty terrible. West Bank is much bigger than Gaza, much more warfare. Iran could be involved. It would be a mess. Right above the West Bank, right on the curve of the West Bank is the Jezreel Valley. There's a mountain there, and there's the Jezreel Valley. Almost every cool battle that happens in the Scripture, except for David and Goliath, almost all the other cool battles happen in the Jezreel Valley. So this is like the place where Deborah and Barak, fought for Israel. This is where Gideon, defeated the Amalekites. This is where Saul won battles. This is where Josiah wins battles. And even more, it's where the plain of Megiddo is, or what we call Armageddon, right? Where there's a future battle that the book of Revelation tells us that the last battle on earth will also happen in the Jezreel Valley, right? Isn't that interesting? So all the battles, but so much bloodshed has happened through Jehu and through other kings that God says, I want you to name your kid Jezreel, because right now Jezreel has a name that essentially means bloodshed, right? That's not what the place is really called, but he's saying, if you need to know that I'm upset with you because of the kind of blood that you have spread. Now, it's interesting because each one of these kings started relying on their own strength. right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with fighting back when you're attacked like we're having today. But there's another thing when you don't get to the next level. The first level of responding to an attack is to respond to an attack. And war is a terrible thing, and sometimes wars break out. But in the middle of that war, if we start relying on our weapons more than relying on the Lord, then we're going to end up like Hezekiah. So Hezekiah was a great military leader. He actually literally redirected the spring, but he started relying on his wealth more than on the Lord. You see? So Israel right now, the Israel current, could be making a very similar mistake, right? And what happens is I hear people say to me all the time, Israel has to finish what it started. The problem is that if they don't finish what they start by repenting and coming back to the Lord, then there's always going to be an enemy, right? It might not be Hamas. It's going to be somebody else. Because the pattern is the same that we see in Scripture, that if we respond with weapons, which is sometimes valid, and we don't then rely on the strength of the Lord to fight our battles, then we will always be in a perpetual war. We will constantly be in a perpetual war. So the prophet is, Ezekiel talks about the bones and the bones coming together. I believe we're in a time where the bones have come together and God has made Israel stand up again, but he still has to breathe his life into them, and they still have to return to the Lord their God. If they don't, then they're only going to be a country like every other country. Right? They're not much different than us. In fact, they have almost the exact same weapons as us because we sold them to them. Right? So they're going to end up looking like country like every other country if we don't find a way to make the Lord the priority even in the midst of a battle. Does that make sense? And that's what happened with each one of these kings. So he says, name your first son Jezreel as a memorial to how terrible these battles are. He says, and on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And what he's essentially saying is I'm going to make sure that their military might breaks so that they don't rely on it, right? There's a point of where you start getting used to the fact that we're winning, right? The battle's against us, we start winning, we start going, man, I'm pretty good at winning. And then God goes, now I got to stop you from winning, right? Like any good parent, you just don't start believing that you get to do it because I let you do it this one time, right? You can go to grandma's house. Yes, you get extra video game time. Doesn't mean now you always can play video games, right? Which, by the way, Joey knows what I'm talking about. It happens all the time, right? Right? Doesn't mean we can just do it again. Doesn't know, oh, that was that one-time thing, right? By the way, he's really good at asking when he can do it. But the more you say, yes, grace, yes, grace, 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 and we live in a time where there are believers around the world that have experienced so much love and so much grace, and they're just swimming in the grace that they also forget that we don't really deserve it. That grace is something that we were given by God. It's mercy. It's not something we deserve. It's something that he's offering us because he's a father, because he loves us. And you'll find in the book of Hosea that even though the first 4 chapters talk about a husband who's married to a woman that's constantly cheating on him, later it starts talking about Israel like a father-son relationship, right? Because it's really criticizing these kings. It's saying if fathers don't teach their sons, then the sons will get worse. And that's what you find with all these kings. That one king, he was pretty good. He just didn't knock down the high places. Then the next son goes, well, the high places are actually kind of cool. Then the next son actually participates in the high places. Then the next son gives his own son to the wrong, like in a sacrifice to a different god. Do you see what I mean? It progressively gets worked because we're not removing the things from our lives, right? Which is what we're doing on Passover. As we prepare for Passover, what we're doing is we're practicing this idea of how hard is it to remove all the things that might cause problems later. Right? So you go through and you remove all the leaven, and when you remove the leaven's not the problem. The leaven is a multiplier. So if you have sin in your house, it's going to multiply. So you got to remove the multiplier, the activator, because if you don't remove the activator, then the sin's going to grow. So you go, well, it's not that big a deal. I mean, I only do this. They don't even know I'm doing it. But you have to know that as a generation goes by, and most of you have felt the effects of what it's like to have your parents not deal with their stuff, right? And you see the multiplier in your life, and then it's even harder to get rid of it later. And that's what's happening for Hosea. So God's sending him to say, listen, Israel has been unfaithful, and they're relying on their own strength. And one day I'm going to knock down their strength just so that they will realize that they're not as strong as they think. Because ultimately, the strength that we have actually comes from the Lord. So we keep winning the battle. I mean, you look at King David when he goes to Saul to explain his credentials for being able to fight Goliath. He says to him, I killed a bear and I killed a lion, but it was the Lord who saved me. Right? He always gives credit to he knows that he didn't really kill that lion and bear by himself. If he started going, you know what, I killed a bear and a lion, they should listen to me, God would have to knock him down. Right? And that's what happened with Saul. Saul was carrying a sword when he probably shouldn't even have been carrying a sword. Right? And then he offers that terrible tool to David, and David goes, I don't even know what weapon you're fighting with. This is not, the Lord is who is on our side. Why have we been waiting for 40 days and listening to this guy curse our God and our people, and you just stand there with a sword that does nothing? Right? Because Saul somehow bought into the fact that he was strong when he really wasn't. It was grace and mercy. David, even though he messed up a lot, seemed to also understand that God was the one that saved him. So then she conceives again. Look at verse 6. Conceives again and gives birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, name her Lo-Ruhamah, for whom they will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, and I will that I would ever forgive them. The name itself literally means no compassion or no mercy. So God's saying, I want you to name your child. Who names their kid? I mean, we have weird names these days, right? But who names their kid No Mercy? I mean, other than maybe if you're into the Karate Kid or something. Like if you're in Cobra Kai. If you don't know what that is, then I'm sorry. Okay, so, but No Mercy, that's the name of his daughter. Now, listen, it'd be one thing if you named your son No Mercy, but to name your daughter No Mercy, to me, is just like, I can't even imagine. I'm sure when Hosea heard this, he went, oh, okay. Like, because look, I feel like the Lord said to me in a dream what to name Rachel, right? And it was confirmed by other people. I mean, I can't even tell you when I had the dream, and then I kept it in my heart, and then people came up to me, and they, like my sister-in-law gave me a card and said, you should name her Rachel. And then when we went to a sonogram, my father-in-law said, I think this baby's name is Rachel. Like, it was like this over and over. That's nice and pretty and cute, right? I can't even imagine if I said to my family, like, Heather's there, we're in the sonogram, we're sitting, he goes, what should we name her? How about No Mercy? Right? I mean, I can't even imagine, right? But this is now listen, this is how God feels, not what he's going to do. Right? Because as a father, he feels like, man, I just want to tear this down. Because here's the thing is God has emotions, and we're going to talk about this in a couple years, but God has emotions, and he has emotions just like a father. And like any good father, you think, man, sometimes I want to rip your face off. Right? But other times I want to embrace you and I want to forgive you for the things you're doing. And if only you would turn back to me, if only you were faithful, if only you tried, I would embrace you like I'll give you everything. And you constantly find yourself wanting to destroy and wanting to offer mercy, right? It depends on the day. Depends on the situation. We were at Phil's friends last night. He's going to laugh that I tell this story out loud, but we were at Phil's friends last night, and they had a raffle, and one of the raffles was this like bottle of alcohol that you could win. It was like a nice bottle. Like if you win the raffle, you get this bottle. So they're just like doing tickets, and of course, they call the number, and a little kid jumps up and goes, "That's me!" And he won like a really nice bottle of scotch, right? And so then that was already embarrassing enough. But then while Phil was talking, his son grabbed the mic and went, "A kid won the alcohol," right? And then Phil goes, "Oh, I cannot believe he just did that in front of the entire event, that he grabbed the mic and was like, a kid won." I said, well, listen, if anything, he's got a gift of oration. He's not afraid to speak in front of people. Maybe we can work on that, right? Maybe we can like redeem his ability. He had no fear to tell everybody. It was hilarious. It was really funny. But this is how God feels about his people sometimes, right? There's a difference between how he feels, right, and what he's going to do. And that's like any good father. How you feel at that moment is not, hopefully, the way that you actually react. Because there are feelings that rise up, right? I'm looking at you like, am I the only one who has problems? Right? You're looking at me like, no, my kids are perfect. Never get angry, right? Okay, so at least in my family, there are times. It says, but, listen to what it says, but I will have compassion on the house of Judah and deliver them by the Lord their God, and not deliver them by the bow, the sword, the battle, horse, or horseman. He's saying, I'm not going to deliver them with more military might, because that's what they're struggling with. They're struggling with the fact that they're so strong, and they look strong, and everybody thinks they're strong, and they're the strongest. And he's saying, so I can't deliver them with more strength. I'm going to have to deliver them a different way. To show them who they really are, I'm going to have to deliver them a different way. Now notice, Hosea is talking to both Israel and Judah. Right? So he's saying Israel is relying on its own strength, but Judah will be preserved if they turn back. And we know by the end of Hosea and all the prophets that Judah does not do that. So then they have another baby. It says, when they had weaned no mercy, she conceived and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said, name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. The name Lo Ami literally means not my people. So you put this together, you say, the Jezreel Valley is full of blood because of Jehu, right? They're relying on their military power like Jotham. Do you see what he's doing? He's literally going through each king and saying, you think that you are strong, but you are relying on your strength and not relying on me. Now, it's easy to blame the kings. I know some of you go, man, those kings were the worst. But what it's really speaking to is it's speaking to a pattern of the human condition, that all of us do the same thing. You guys know I struggle with my weight, and I'm telling you right now, I'm right at that place now where I'm starting to feel a little bit good about losing weight. And I bet you in a month from now, I'm going to get judgmental about other people who haven't lost weight. Right? That's usually, and I have to stop myself because I go, okay, I'm getting skinnier, right? I'm working really hard. And people say, oh, you look good. It's getting skinny. You can tell me after service how good I look. It's great. Okay, so I'm getting skinnier, but then at some point, someone's going to come to me, and I'm going to go, it's like as if I forgot that I'm getting help from everybody. Do you see what happens? Right? And then all of a sudden I go, oh, yeah, because I know what I'm doing because I'm more disciplined than the rest of you. But that's not really what's happening, right? I'm getting help from all sorts of people, right? My wife, what she buys, from a doctor, from all sorts of stuff, right? I'm not really doing anything. I'm not relying on my own strength, but it can look that way. And if I start relying on the grace that I've been given and the extra that God is giving me and the ability to do it, and then all of a sudden I start going, the rest of you are the worst, right? That's exactly what happens with believers. That somehow the gospel, which is good news, that God can clean you even when you're dirty, and he can even clean the inside, turns into, I'm better than you because God saved me. You see the problem? Right? So Hosea is speaking against this, and he's saying, name him Jezreel because that'll remind you of all the blood. Name him you no mercy because that's how I feel about you right now. And name them you're not my people because at the end of the day, if I wanted to, I could just say you're not my people because you have broken every covenant that I've made with you. Right? This is tough. But then look at what he says. He says, yet, this is verse 10, the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sands of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said, you are not my people, it will be said of them, you are the sons of the living God. So he's saying, even though I feel like you have caused bloodshed, even though I want you to believe that you are just unfaithful, and you need to know that it makes God angry, even though he feels that way, even though he feels like saying, you're not even my people, he's saying, one day, not only will you be my people, but I'm going to upgrade you to be like a son. I'm going to do something that makes you even better than just being a people. You'll be like one of my children. And how is he going to do it? He says, and the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader. There'll be one person who's in charge. So instead of having two kingdoms with multiple kings that are all terrible, one day we're going to have one leader, and the book of Hosea is going to outline it, and the book of Isaiah makes it very clear that that one leader will be the Messiah. And that one leader, he says, and they will go up from the land, for that day will be great in Jezreel. Right? He's saying, so there's a battle coming that it won't be about horses, and it won't be about strength, and it won't be how I feel about you. I'm going to transform you from a people into my children. And you're all going to be under one leader, the Messiah. And that day, the Jezreel will turn into something else. And it's funny that in the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the New Testament, there's a battle that happens at Megiddo that is the last battle at Jezreel. Right? He's saying that will be the glory because at that battle, the Messiah shows up and all his people come with him. And in that battle, he doesn't just defeat evil, he destroys evil. And he destroys sin. And he puts us in a place where we get to be with him in his kingdom forever. And not only does he clean the outside of us, but he cleans the inside of us as well. And even if we are covered in sores and things that disqualify us, he will not only clean us, but upgrade us into sons and daughters. Right? So at the end of the day, if you want to know what your identity is, it's you are a daughter or son of God. Except that he's pretty mad at you because you don't act that way. Do you see the thing? Like we're not actually acting like his children. So it's interesting that this idea comes up both, by the way, in the New Testament, both when Paul is talking to the Romans, who are Gentiles, and when Peter is talking to the Jewish people. They quote this same section. Now, in the book of Romans, which is you get Romans 9, 10, and 11, it's all about this olive tree. right? And it has this whole symbol. And in the middle of it, he says to the Romans, who are Gentiles, right? Romans are from Italy. If you didn't know, those are Gentiles, right? So he says to them, to the Romans, he says, hey, you used to not be a people, but God will make you my people. He'll call you, it used to be you're not my people, but wait, now you will be called my people. So he uses this idea, this kind of language, and he says, even if you were not even a part of the nation of Israel, God is going to bring you together with Israel the same way he brings together Israel and Judah. If he can reconcile Israel and Judah despite our inner fighting, right, despite the fact that we have set up idols, if he can heal Israel, then he can heal the whole world, right? So he's going to bring together both, right? In 1 Peter, when Peter is talking to the Jewish people, he says, he quotes it directly, and he says, you're going to be called not my people, but because of what Yeshua did, you are now considered the sons of God, right? There's this idea that you are going to be more than just the people of God, that it'll be like you're treated like a son, because if it was just a marriage, he could divorce us, right? He could say, listen, you not only were you unfaithful, but you're unfaithful and unfaithful and unfaithful. I'm not even sure if these kids are mine. I'm done. But with a father and a son, it's not that easy. Because now it's you have compassion on your children, that you want them to be better than you are. You want them to do better than you did. You want to offer them mercy even when they don't deserve it. So God says, even though I can treat you like a spouse in this amazing metaphor, I'm actually going to treat you like one of my kids. And I'm going to make sure, because of my promise to Abraham, which is why he brings up the sands of the seashore, because that's the promise to Abraham. Because I made a promise to Abraham and all of his children, and one day he would be the father of not one nation, but many nations. And that plays out in multiple ways. You get the entire nation of Israel, which is broken up into 12 tribes, and you have 12 nations that come out of that. But you also have Ishmael, and all of the nations that come with him. Those are all part of Abraham. And then in the future, you have people who are now brought into the commonwealth of Israel, and they become under the promise of. So when God promised Abraham, right, to be the father of many nations, he didn't just mean Jewish nations, he meant of all the nations. So because of his promise to Abraham, he looks at us and he says, you know what, I'm not going to follow the Torah and just divorce you because I'm allowed to. I'm going to treat you like a child, and I'm going to keep you no matter what. Do you see what he's doing? So for us, we can't start believing that we're awesome, because what he's saying is you're not awesome, but I love you more than I don't think you're awesome. Right? I mean, that's tough. Hosea is being really harsh. In fact, Hosea had to go through a really harsh thing to get this concept across. But let's jump to the end of Hosea, because we just don't have time to do the whole book of Hosea. Maybe one day we will. But go to the end of Hosea, and I just want to read to you the last chapter of Hosea, right? Because you'll see that what happens is there's a bookend that happens, right? There's a big giant parentheses in the book of Hosea. So listen to what he says at the end of Hosea, Hosea chapter 14. I'm going to kind of wait for you to get there so you can read it with me. It says, "Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away our iniquity and receive us graciously, that we may present the fruit of our lips," essentially our worship. "Assyria will not save us. We do not ride on horses, nor do we say to our God to do the work of our hands. For in you the orphan finds mercy." Do you see what he's doing? He's bringing up this idea of, if we really understood who we were, we would realize that we have received mercy. He says, "I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned away from them. I will be like the dew to Israel. He will become like the lily, and he will take root like the cedars of Lebanon. He will his shoots will sprout, and his beauty will be like an olive tree, and the fragrance will be like the cedars of Lebanon. And those who live in the shadow," and from the context of the rest of this, we know that he means both the fruit and the shadow extend to all the nations, from the context of the book. He says, "Those who live in the shadow will rise again, and they will blossom like the vine. His renown will be like the wine of Lebanon. O Ephraim," which is another name for Israel, "what more have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like the luxuriant cypress, and from me comes your fruit." And then he says, "Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the righteous will walk in them, but the transgressors will stumble in them." So what it's saying is there are two kinds of people. There are two people who understand that they are living on a wave of mercy, provided by God, and any fruit that we are producing is really fruit produced by God. And any shade that we are under in the heat of the day comes from the Lord. There are those kinds of people, and those people will walk it that way. But then there are other people who will stumble over it, and he means stumbling over the fact that they start believing that the shade is theirs, and the fruit is theirs, and the gifts are theirs, and the ideas are theirs, and the strength is theirs, and ultimately those things will trip us up. So it's a pretty amazing thing, because he's showing us through the entire book of Hosea what it's like to be somebody who's unfaithful, but also how much stronger the Lord's mercy is than our unfaithfulness. Right? That we are sons and daughters of God, that he will give us this opportunity under the Messiah to become who we're meant to be.